name is Kate. I'm here in Moscow, and I'm going to do a demonstration of how to make a face mask out of cloth at home. If you were here on Tuesday, then you heard my husband talking about American football, but I'm going to do a mask demonstration. I want to start off by saying that there are other masks, other homemade face masks that you can make. I'm just showing you one of the ways that you can do it. There are ways that are simpler than this, but this one is my favorite that I've made so far because it really stays on your face really well and it's pretty comfortable as far as homemade masks go. So the final product that we'll be making looks like this. It's made out of woven fabric, and it's got an elastic band at the end. I'll show you some different ways to secure the mask at the end. If you don't mind putting up the first slide. It has the pattern on it. The pattern comes in 4 sizes: a small kid size, and then the youth size for older kids, the women size, and then the men size. I can show you how here in just a second. And if you can go to the next slide. Okay, great. These are the written instructions for the mask. So the step-by-step of what I'll be doing for you here today. I don't know how many pages there are of the written instructions. If you can briefly go through those, and then we'll come back and start doing the demonstration. Okay, yeah, great. So they'll be available for you after the video also, so you don't need to try to write everything down or remember everything right now. So the first thing you want to do is decide what size you want to make. I found that for most adults, I've been using the largest size, but it seems fine for everybody that I've made it for so far. The kid size, the very smallest size, if you can see this one in my hands, this is how big the smallest kid for our daughter, who's almost 4, and it's worked for other kids who are 5 and 7 also. So if you've got kids in that age, maybe that size will work for them. If they're a little bit older, if they're in their teens, maybe you want the youth size instead. First step is you want to pre-wash whatever fabric you're going to use. This pattern needs to be, you need to use woven fabric instead of knit, because it's not going to stretch whole shape and get warped. So you want to use some woven fabric. If you don't have fabric at home, other things that you could use are or a bed sheet, like a men's button-down shirt would also be that woven fabric if you've got one of those laying around at home that you could use. For this pattern, I wouldn't recommend using a t-shirt, and so it's gonna warp and shift on you with this particular pattern. So the very first step, you want to pre-wash your fabric so that after your mask is finished, it doesn't shrink at all. So pre-wash your fabric, and if you need to, go ahead and press your fabric flat when you're cutting. I've just got some fabric over here, just some woven fabric you guys can see. You're going to need, you've got 2 pattern pieces, the outer piece and then the smaller. You know, take your fabric and fold it in half. I found that with a yard of fabric, I can make about 10 masks. So if you have a yard, a meter of fabric, maybe 10 masks to do, like to do it assembly line style. So to cut all the second step, then the third step, I'm not doing each one individually. I just think that makes it go faster. But if I do one just on its own from start to finish, it takes about a half an hour. If you don't have a sewing machine, you can do it by hand. It's obviously going to take a bit longer because you're sewing by hand instead of with a sewing machine. So once you've got your fabric washed and pressed, if it needs to be pressed, you're going to take your pattern pieces, and just lay them down on your fabric. I find that I get the most yardage out of it if I put them together like this, that this saves some of the fabric when I'm cutting them, especially when I'm doing a bunch. I'm not going to make you watch me cut the fabric. I'm sure you guys have all seen fabric being cut before, but I like to use a rotary cutter. If you don't have a rotary cutter, just scissors. You can lay the pattern pieces on there and just cut straight around them, or you can trace them with a marker and then cut them out. That would be easy as well. So what we're going to have when we're done cutting is 2 liner pieces and 2 outer pieces. For the first couple steps, I'm using a kid size because I ran out of fabric, and so I needed to make them kid sizes because they're much smaller. So once you've got them cut out, put them together right sides together. Hopefully you can see this. The right side of the fabric is this gray kind of floral pattern, and the wrong side is just plain white. So put them together right sides together, both your 2 liner pieces and your 2 outer pieces. Put them together right sides together. It's easy. Then I like to sew from the bottom of the mask to the top. I find that it's easier for the machine to do that curve. And you're just going to stitch this curved edge about 1/4 of an inch. This has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Just sew from top to bottom. You want to back stitch at the start and end because this is going to be a really important seam for the mask. You don't want it coming apart. So at the very start, just make your machine go back a couple stitches, then forward. And at the end, sew to the end and then go back a couple stitches too. Back. Back stitch the end, and then you have what looks like this. You do that for your outer piece and your liner piece. And I've done some work ahead of this, so you don't have everything twice. So your outer piece and your liner piece at this point will be the same. The only difference is the size. So you've got your liner piece sewed together and your outer piece sewed together. Because this is a curve, I want to clip the curve. And what that means is you're just going to take some scissors and you're going to cut up to, but not through your stitch. I do it about every inch or about 4 or 5 cuts through here. So just through the fabric, up to the seam, but not through the seam. Most of that to go through the seam. Do outer piece and your liner piece. And then is a curve nicer if after you've clipped it, you're going to want to trim. So here I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm going to trim down so that it's about half. The shorter seam allowance. You've still got the little clips in there, so that your curve can lay nice and flat. But you can see that a kid size. You can see that the one on the front is where I've clipped and trimmed the seam, and this one is in the back is where it's just been stitched together. So you can see that it's made it smaller. That's going to make the curve lay flatter and nicer for you when you put the final mask together. So we've clipped the curves and trimmed the seam allowance. Next step is to press again. So an iron is going to be fairly important to this project to make sure that it's the way that it's supposed. This is the first time that the liner piece, we're going to treat the liner piece differently than the outer piece. So what we're going to do for both pieces is to iron them flat. side out. You can see the floral pattern again. And you're just going to press it down so that it lays nice and flat. Do that for both your liner piece and your outer piece. Then with the liner piece, we are going to take the short edge, so lay it down right side down on your ironing board along the short inch. So it looks like that. You can see the right side of the fabric on the wrong side, and then you're going to fold that one more time. So you have this. It's like a double fold, or done that before. I'm just going to press that down. While that's pressing, you can do the same thing on the other side. So fold it about 1/4 inch and then press it down. So when it's done, you have a liner that looks like this on the inside. It's got two nice clean edges. So now your liner piece and your outer piece are slightly different. What we're going to do next, take the liner piece, and I'm using an adult size now because I'm switching which fabric piece I'm working with. On this liner piece, we need to stitch down the fold that we just made. So we can do that first. Just stitch down, again, about 1/4 inch. So really just lining up your presser foot to the edge of the fabric and sew straight down. You don't need to back stitch on this one because these ends are going to get caught in other seams. So it's okay if you just do a straight stitch all the way down with no back stitching. So you're going to stitch down both short edges of the liner. Then on both the liner and the outer piece, you're going to do a top stitch along this curved seam. So the top stitch is going to go through only one layer of fabric. And this step is actually pretty important. I found that I try to mask without top stitching, and it's not as secure as the masks with top stitching. So this top stitch, it's going to help the mask form to your face better. So all you're going to do is put the right side of the fabric facing up, and then you kind of want to pull this seam apart so that you can get your presser foot lined up right to the side of the seam. And you're going to stitch just about 1/4 inch away from the seam that you made that's holding the two pieces of fabric together. And when I top stitch, I like to increase the length of my stitch. I just feel like it looks nicer. You don't have to back stitch on this because, again, it's going to get caught in other seams, so it doesn't need to be reinforced. So this is just going to go straight along the first seam that we made on one side or the other. It doesn't matter. Right side or left side doesn't matter. And as you're sewing, it's important to keep kind of working the fabric open so that you're keeping the presser foot right alongside of that curved seam that you made. Okay. So that's the liner piece. On the liner piece, you make 3 new stitches. You do the 2 short sides and you top stitch the curve. On the outer piece, you just need to top stitch along the curve. So when you're done with that step, you have what looks like this. So you've got a liner piece that's top stitched along the curve, and it's stitched on both of the short ends. And you've got an outer piece that's also top stitched, just to the side of that curved seam. Okay, so really the 2 pieces are the same, almost the same. The only difference is on the short ends of the liner piece. So now we're actually going to start to put the mask together. For this, I want some straight pins. So take your one piece or the other, it doesn't matter, and put the wrong side of the fabric down, and take the other piece of the fabric right side down on top. You want to match up the 2 center seams. of your liner piece and your outer piece. We're going to have the liner piece and the outer piece. We're going to finally stitch them together. Oops. Okay. After we've got them pinned together, we're going to do a stitch on the long ends of the mask. So along the top edge and along the bottom edge. And you want to do it, you'll see that there's a difference in length between your liner piece and your outer piece. You want to continue the stitch all the way to the end of the outer piece because that's going to be your guide for a later step. Because we're making a mask with a casing for the elastic to go through. So if you keep the stitch going all the way to the end of the outer piece, it'll give you a guide for when you need to fold that over later on. So again, stitch about 1/4 of an inch from the top edge and the bottom edge of the mask. This doesn't need to be back stitched because it's going to be there are going to be other seams on top of it that will catch the ends of this seam. So just a straight stitch down the bottom edge of the mask and along the top edge of the mask. And just going, when you get to the center of the mask, you'll notice there's a little divot where your nose goes. Just kind of make sure you curve around that. All the way to the end. Get off. So that when we're done stitching along the top and the bottom edges, we've got a nice mask that looks like this. It's sewn along the top all the way to the end of the outer piece. It's sewn along the bottom all the way to the end of the outer piece, but it's inside out. So next step is just to, like a sock, just turn it right side out. I just kind of have to poke the top of the mask up a little bit because it likes to get stuck. Okay, so now starting to look like an actual face mask. You can see what the final product is gonna look like. Next, you want to press it because we're gonna be top stitching. So you can see what I'm doing. You just want to get the seam to lay nice and flat. Oh, and again, remember how I said you want to stitch all the way to the end of the outer piece? That's because you're going to use that as your fold line right here. So you're going to fold this edge of the outer piece down right along that seam that you just made. So that extending the stitches all the way to the end of the outer piece, that created a guide for you to fold it down right there. So then we'll just press it and press all 4 edges of it. Make sure you get the outer piece folded down so that it lays nice and flat for you. And then press along the top too, folding down the outer side. Okay, so now on the inside of your mask, you can see that the outer piece is folded up along the long edges there. It's important to note also, one thing you can check for is to make sure that you have a pocket here. You can stick your hand inside the mask. What's cool about this one is that it will have this pocket when it's finished, and you can put other things in there if you want an extra layer of mask protection. I've heard of people putting coffee filters in there or other surgical masks. Maybe like you could put one of these inside of the mask. If you have an N95 mask, you can also put this mask over top of it so that it can last longer. This one, I put a coffee filter in here so you can see that you can put something in there. I've heard of other people putting a paper towel in there just to add something else, maybe a Kleenex. You could also use another piece of fabric if you want to put it in between. You've got the option to put something else in the mask to give you a little bit more protection if you want. Okay, so we've got the mask. It's got the pocket. We can stick our hand through the mask all the way through. And we've got these nice folded up edges on the side. What we're going to do now is top stitch along the long edges of the mask. So this time you're going to go through both layers of fabric, the outer piece and the liner piece along the top and the bottom, again, about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And this step, again, with the top stitching on the curved seam, this step is important. I did one without the top stitching along the top, and it doesn't feel like it stays on my nose as well as the masks with top stitching. So this top stitching is going to help secure it a little bit better to your face. And of course, we know we want the masks to be tight on our face to work as well as they possibly can. So what we're going to do next is top stitch 1/4 of an inch along the long edges of the mask. So I've got my stitch length set to 4 on my machine. I just like to do it, again, just a little bit longer than the normal stitch because I think it looks nicer when it's on the outside. No need to back stitch, just a straight stitch from one edge to the other. Okay, and then you can see, hopefully you can see, once we did that stitch, it catches that folded edge in it. So now that folded edge is secured down. So that's top stitching along the bottom edge. You want to top stitch, like I said, along the bottom and the top so that you have what looks like this. You've got the nice folded edges on the side that are secured. Well, I missed them on this one, but you get the idea. Nice folded edges on the outer piece and a nice line of top stitching on the top here and on the bottom of the mask here. So the next step, this is why I just leave my iron plugged in when I'm doing this, because you have to do a lot of ironing. And also part of why I said I like to do like 10 or 20 masks at a time, because I think it's more time efficient to do like all of the pressing at once and then do all of the top stitching at once and all of whatever step, that step for every mask you're making all at once, and then move on to the next step, just because you're switching back and forth so much from sewing to pressing to cutting to whatever. So if you're going to make more than one, I would recommend like cutting them all out, then stitching the center all together on all of them, then trimming all of them, then pressing all of them, then top stitching all of them, doing each step on all the masks before you move on to the next step. I just think that's easier. Of course, if you're just doing one mask, then just do it. So we've got to press again. And this is an important step because we're going to be making now the casing for our elastic. I'm just looking for right here. We're making the casing for the elastic. So if you can see on this mask that I did, there's a nice little kind of tube right here in the mask that the elastic can slide through. We're going to make that tube, that casing right now. So what we're going to do on your mask, lay your mask down with the outer side down on your ironing board. Again, you're going to fold up the short edge about 1/4 of an inch and give that a press. So it looks like this, like what we did with the liner piece. You just got a little small fold on the outer piece along the short edge. And then you're going to take this whole piece and fold it so that this edge of the outer piece matches but does not cover this edge of the liner piece. So you want to fold it so that they meet each other. You don't want them to overlap each other because then that'll close the pocket that you made. but you want them to meet up with each other, but not to overlap each other. So after the first little fold, we're going to fold it again. I'll show you what that looks like. You've got the outer piece meeting the liner piece, but they don't actually touch each other. So it'll keep the pocket open, and it'll create the tubing for your elastic or your closure to go through. So once you've got them meeting each other, then give it another press. And you're going to do that on both sides of your mask. So in the end, you'll have these two, well, you can see that, these two folds in there that are nice and pressed in. So what that looks like, it's just like this. This one has it on both sides. It's got one press here and one press here. Then on the other side, one press here and one press here. We're going to fold that down. So it looks like that, and we're going to stitch it down. If you've been top stitching, remember to change your stitch length back to your normal stitch length, because this is going to be a functional seam. You're going to stitch just along this edge of the outer piece. And again, it's the most important thing here is to make sure that your outer piece and your liner piece don't get sewn together, because you want to keep the tube that we're making for the elastic to go through and the pocket. You want to keep both of those functional. So we're just going to stitch down through the double folded outer piece without sewing through the liner piece. So this one, make sure you back stitch again, because this is a functional seam, so you want to back stitch to make it secure, and then just stitch straight down this outer piece. Stitch at the end and take it off. So then what you can see is you've got a nice little tube. Let me find my tweezers. You've got a nice little tube here that you can put your elastic in. So you've got a pocket in the mask that you can put like another filter or something in, and you've got the tube, the casing on the side for the elastic. Do that on both sides, and then you are almost done. Once you've done that on both sides, it'll look about like this. But what I've done is I went ahead and put the elastic through on this one. So let's talk quickly about what you're going to use to secure the mask. You have a couple options. I prefer to use, excuse me, I prefer to use a 6mm elastic. I haven't been able to get that delivered to the house, so I've run out of my stash of what I had. You can use, I have used this like 15mm elastic. That'll fit through the adult sizes. It won't work on the kid sizes. So if you're making a kid size, you would need something that's thinner than this, but this will work on the adult sizes. You could also try to use just ribbon. If you have some ribbon around the house, just make sure that you measure it carefully to know how much you need to thread through there in order for the mask to secure correctly to your face. What I'm going to use right now is this clear elastic. It's what I was able to get delivered after I ran through what I had. So this is 6mm clear elastic. It's not as easy to work with, so I don't like using it as much as this white elastic, but it works fine. Another thing that you can try is you could use hair ties to secure your mask. So just 2 hair elastics, maybe one for each side. I haven't actually done this yet, but it would be easy enough. What you would do at this step before you sew your casing down, what you'd want to do is put the hair elastic through the casing, because you'll need to capture it inside of the casing when you sew the casing down. So that's going to be a little bit trickier because it's going to make you're going to need to stretch out the hair elastic as you sew it so that you can sew along a straight line. It's going to be a little bit trickier, but it's doable. But that's something that you'd need to do, like I said, before you stitch it down, because you need to get it inside of the casing and then just kind of stretch it out and then sew it like that. So that could work. That could work if you've got hair elastics around the house instead of sewing elastic or anything like that. So once you've got whatever you're going to use to secure the mask. There are two different ways that you can secure the mask, and it's depending on your preference which one you want to use. You can do one that goes all the way around your head, and it's one long piece of elastic. For the adult masks, I think you need about 23 inches. 23 inches of elastic, which is about 59, 60, maybe centimeters of elastic for the adult sizes to get all the way around an adult's head. I'll show you what that looks like. And it goes like that. So that's one way to do it. That's the way that I prefer because I don't like it around my ears. But another way to do it is to do it so that it just goes around your ears. That has a couple of benefits. It saves on the amount of elastic that you need, and it makes it more customizable, maybe for different people's head sizes. So once you have your casing sewn, you're going to need something to help you get the elastic through the casing. I know a lot of people like to use like a safety pin. Like if you pin a safety pin to the end of this elastic, then you can work it through and you can pull on the safety pin to pull it through. You could use a pencil to kind of poke it through. That's worked for me in the past too. I like to use tweezers. I just think it's easiest for this casing. So I've got this pair of tweezers that I'm going to use. I'm just going to secure, and I really hope I can do this on camera because I always struggle with this. When I'm doing them, this is my least favorite part of making the mask. So here's hoping it works this time. So take whatever method you're going to use. You could like tie it to a string and pull it through that way. You can stick it on a pin and pull it through that way. You can just kind of jam it through with a pencil. That's worked. Whatever that you're going to do to get the elastic through your casing. And so what I do is I push the tweezers through, and then once it's through, grab the end, and take the tweezers out, and then you've got elastic on both sides of your casing. You can see it moves back and forth. Do that on both sides, and then what you have looks like this. So you can see I've got the elastic threaded through here to make the two ear loops, and then I've pinned it together. Let's see. For the elastic, when you sew the elastic, you want to use a like a zigzag stitch to secure it, because that's going to give more stability, help the elastic stay together, because this is going to be like the stress point of the mask is the seam in the elastic. So I'm going to set my sewing machine to a zigzag stitch, and then just sew the two ends of the elastic together. When you're doing it, go forward all the way and backward all the way, and then maybe forward and backward again, just because you really don't want this part breaking on the mask, because then your whole mask would fall off. So go forward, back it up, go forward again, back it up, and then take it out. Then I've got elastic sewn together. I'll go ahead and do that on both sides on this one so you can see the finished product. Okay, and again, If you wanted to do the other style of elastic where it goes all the way around your head, you just do a longer piece of elastic and you thread it through one casing, bring it around, and then thread it through the other casing. And then the nice thing is you only have to sew it one time. You just sew the two ends together and you've got it all the way through your entire mask. So this one, now I have sewn the elastic together. The mask is technically finished. You want to make it look nice, you can just trim all your. What I like to do is pull the elastic around so that you can't see the seam on the outside, so that the seam of the elastic gets hidden inside the casing here. So just pull it through until it's hidden, and then you have a mask like that. For the version with the two ear loops.
Hey, Mom.
Hi, love. What do you need?
An outside ball.
You're getting your outside ball. Okay. Sorry. My toddler just came in to come get their outside ball for playing. So if you're doing the version with side loops, I found that for adult 6 inches, which is about 15 centimeters of elastic for each side. So you can see already that's a lot less elastic. That would just be 12 inches of elastic total instead of like 23. So that really saves on elastic if you're making a bunch of these to do the two ear loop version. Then the next step is just wear it and use it. Like I said, you can put something inside the pocket here, maybe a Kleenex, maybe a coffee filter, maybe another piece of fabric if you have one that you want to put through. Something to give you an extra layer of filtration between you and the outside world. But I think the most important thing is whatever kind of mask, they've said that the most important thing is that you just wear something. So this is one version made out of woven fabric with a pocket for a liner. So with that, how long did that take? That took about 40 minutes. So about how long it usually takes me to make one mask. I'm going to finish up the rest of these masks, but I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have, if there are any, or to redo any of the steps if anything wasn't clear. Whatever you guys want to talk about. Where and how did you learn to sew? What else do you sew? Oh my gosh. I first learned how to sew when I was a kid. I remember my mom had a sewing machine and she tried to teach me to sew, and we sewed mostly clothes for my Barbies. And so that was like just taking a piece of fabric and wrapping it around a Barbie and then sewing a straight line down the back of it. And I remember not being very good at it. But then a couple of years ago, I got a sewing machine for Christmas and started sewing again because I decided that I needed to have some type of skill in the event of disaster. I needed to have some type of skill that I could use.
You need a smaller ball.
You need a smaller ball? Okay, love. Sorry, my toddler is back again looking for a smaller ball for outside. So I decided that I needed to learn some kind of skill that could be useful to society. So I learned how to sew and probably and now I really, really like to sew stuff for my kids. I really like to sew like t-shirts and pants and really cute dresses that they never want to wear, but they're so sweet. Yeah, I can show you. I've got a t-shirt here that I sewed that I'm pretty proud of. A little kid's t-shirt that I made last week, I think. So yeah, learned when I was a kid, but then really started taking it seriously a couple years ago. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for watching. I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you guys are able to make some masks, maybe for you and your family. Oh, um, do you reuse these masks? If so, how do you wash them? Yes, absolutely. After every time I've worn it, I wash it, um, and I just wash it in the washing machine, just like you would wash any woven clothes, like any dress. Button-down men's t-shirts, shirts, or anything like that. Um, I don't dry them when they've got the clear elastic in them in the dryer. I just put them on a heater. But you can wash and dry these. But again, it's important that the fabric that you use is pre-washed before you cut the mask out, because if it's not pre-washed, then the woven fabric has a tendency to shrink. So it could end up being too small for what you need. So make sure that you pre-wash the fabric before you cut it. But then after that, yeah, wash them and dry them after every time you use them. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or if not, then I hope that you guys use it to make a mask. Thanks for watching. Okay. So thanks you guys for watching. I hope it was helpful. I hope that everybody stays safe and stays healthy. Um, and the mask patterns and the instructions will be available online for you. Hope it was helpful, and have a great night.